Hello, everybody. This is the last formal episode to our back to school series for the Unmasking Podcast. And I chose Kim Minch, who is a parenting coach expert, because I found her a couple of years ago on TikTok, of all platforms. And I learned quickly that she and I had a lot in common. She has a son, adult son now, who is 14 years sober, who has struggled with addiction, which led her to choose this route to become a parenting coach. And now she works with parents all over the country, helping them support their emerging adults. And I just loved this episode. I learned so many new terms. I learned the difference. I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me is the difference between favors and enabling. There's just so much in this podcast episode that I took away. One thing I will say, disclaimer, if you hear a little scratching it was my 80-pound golden retriever who was stuck outside during this episode. So come on, Cooper. So just ignore that. But yeah, Sarah, thoughts on this episode?
Well, number one, you didn't enable Cooper. You didn't let him in. You finished what you needed to do.
That's
No.
right.
My thoughts, yes, loved this episode. I think it's so needed. I love that we ended it with for our back to school series because I think a lot of parents out there do struggle sometimes with their kids getting them out in the world, and they are a little bit lost. And for those parents to know that just because they're lost doesn't mean that they can't find their way. And that's really what I take away from, um, Kim
This
joining
episode.
us
Yeah.
from this episode. And I think it's important too. She gave us some tips, which I loved, on how to foster behaviors that help set children up for success. Having them do age appropriate things to help around the house, to help them feel empowered, to help them feel that they're capable, and also to really look at the mental health of your child and yourself and get some support for that, because that really can, like she said, first deal with that, because that can really be an underlying factor that's really affecting, these children who are lost, and parents figuring out how to handle that. So I really appreciated her sharing her insight on all of that and being so open with her own story.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And next week, we will be launching our final episode in this back to school series. So we're going to be taking some Q&A just about the podcast so far, about
Yep.
any of the speakers that people have questions about that we've had on so far. So if you could send in those questions, Sarah will put that on our Instagram handle at Unmasked Therapists. And we just appreciate your feedback. We have a new cover. We're so excited.
We're going to launch our website soon.
Yes. So
We have a
lots
lot
of
of fun things.
yeah, so many fun things. We're just really enjoying this, and it's really just starting to gain some traction. And so we just, again, hope that you all enjoy this episode with Kim Minch, and thank you to our listeners. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Unmasking Podcast with Cindy and Sarah. And we are so excited this week to have with us a very special guest. Her name is Kim Minch, and she is a certified parenting coach. And she has graciously agreed to come on here and talk to us a little bit about parenting the emergent adult. And that's a new term that I'm going to be using a lot in this episode, is the emerging adult. And I just want to first start off by sharing a little bit about how I found Kim. Kim actually came into my For You feed on TikTok probably about a year ago, as I began watching videos for help for myself, getting ready to launch a kid off to college. And so I began watching your TikToks, Kim, and I just couldn't get enough of your story, your advice, how down to earth you were whenever you would share just these little tips about emerging adults. And I just think that it is an area, Kim, that we need so much more support and help.
Mhm.
And not a lot of people are talking about this stage in the game because we figure, hey, we have these kids, we've raised them, and they're 18, and here we go. Good luck. And so
Mhm.
I just thank you for that, Kim, and wanted to see if you could start us off by sharing a little bit about just your background. So, what made you decide to get into parent coaching? Just tell us a little bit about your story, if you would.
Okay, Cindy, thank you. And I didn't know that. I'm so excited to have learned that you were following for a year and that is why you were following. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. I grew up and I'm not going to go deep into my story, but I'm going to give you the highlights of it just so people have my background. So I grew up in the Midwest in Wisconsin. I'm the oldest of three. I had a very upper middle class upbringing and went to private schools. I went to a state college, and just prior to going to college, I met who I thought was the love of my life, blah, 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 right? During my freshman year in college, I ended up getting pregnant. And that was a huge turning point in my life because my dad was very disappointed. We'll just say it mildly, and told me if I wanted to keep my son, I needed to leave our family home and figure out life on my own. So I was 18 years old. He was born just before my 19th birthday, and trying to figure out, as someone who didn't even have any idea how I was going to handle that. The woman I nannied for while I was pregnant told me about the welfare system. And so as a very large pregnant person, I went to the downtown Milwaukee welfare office, applied for benefits, and moved out of my home just as my son was born on $360 a month and food stamps. So it was a huge change, and it could have gone any directions. Now, my mom was very supportive of my choice, but she was unwilling to go against my dad in terms of, keeping me at home. And quite frankly, as difficult as that stage was, it was really, she helped me as much as she could help me, and I needed that help.
Mm-hmm.
But it also was good that I wasn't home, quite frankly. I think it worked out. So bottom line, my son was born. His father and I stayed together for the first couple of years, but he was verbally and mentally abusive and became physically abusive. And when that happened, I decided I had to get out of it. But I still had to co-parent with this man for the next
Mhm.
18 years, which
Mm-hmm.
proved to be quite a challenge. Anyway, a couple years later, I started dating, not a couple years later, it wasn't that much later. I started dating my now husband. We've been married 32 years. And within a year, we were married. Our parents were very close friends. So I knew a lot of his family history and whatnot, as he did mine. We've been married. We have three sons and a daughter together. So I have a total of five, I'm going to say quote unquote here, kids at this point. My daughter is 19, and my oldest son, whom I walked through an addiction to alcohol with when he was 20,
Mm-hmm.
which is in part how I got to what I'm doing. But he's 37 years old at this point. So I have been in the emerging adult stage, and we can talk about what that is. I'm sure we will. I've
Mm-hmm.
been in the emerging adult stage for many, many years with many personalities. So I don't like the term expert. I will, however, say I have a lot of experience with it, and I spend a lot of time, because I do think you're right, Cindy. We do not have enough eyes on this stage of parenting and enough people speaking about it. I will say my son became addicted to alcohol at the age of 20 as a result of some of the blended family issues going back and forth between two very different homes. And I don't think he felt fully accepted for who he was in either one. He was struggling with OCD and major depressive disorder, and, turned to alcohol to cope.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mhm.
it was a couple of years of really major ups and downs, of a lot of, I would say probably I had PTSD with,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of
Mhm.
things that I was going through with him. And perhaps some of your listeners can relate to that. I'm fortunate to say that he did find his footing in sobriety. And while he still struggles daily with OCD and depression, he is 14 years sober. He was 14 years sober in May. And I
That's
truly
amazing.
believe that the parent that I was during that stretch that was so dark for him made a difference in his ability to move forward. That is not me taking credit for
Mhm.
it. Just, I think, because the way I partnered with him, when I was going through that with him, I was really looking back also in my own childhood and my own parenting, knowing simultaneously I had 4 kids behind this one that I needed to carry through adolescence, that I need
Yeah.
to bring through adolescence. And I didn't want to go through that again. So I really looked at the way I was parented, the
Mhm.
parenting I was doing, how I contributed to the situation with my son. I didn't get stuck there. I decided to be more productive with him and look at what did I not get from my parents when I was going through a critical time in my early emergent years that I can give to my son. And that was emotional support.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful.
That's
Thank you for
beautiful.
sharing that, just a
Yeah.
snippet of that journey for you. And I love how you point out what an introspective journey you've been on, and how I feel personally by watching a lot of your content already, that it requires the parent to step forward and really look at their history, how they're approaching their children, their own skeletons in their closet, the ways that they were parented, the things they want to let go of. So thank you for that, Kim, just kind of setting up, the story moving forward. Sarah, you want to take the next question?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that with our listeners. Because what I was taking away from what you were just talking about too is how important it is for parents, especially in our generation. I feel like we're trying really hard to own our part in things with our children, to not make it an excuse for their behavior, but to own our part in it. To help them grow and to help us grow and to change the trajectory of things that we've had through generational traumas and things like that. So I really appreciate you being so open and sharing all of that, because that is difficult to do, because you're trying to look at yourself and all the things you've been through and help your child who's going through this. And it's really kind of traumatic for everyone. Then on top of it, you have 4 other children. And I'm sure that that affected those children as well. And you have to parent every child a little different. So, with that being said, will you just talk a little bit about how you got into what you do now, or really what you
Yes.
do right now to help parents based on your experience with children who are struggling?
Yes. And let me just say also, what I didn't tell you is that the college that I had to leave at 18 in order to have my son, I went back to college, finished a psychology degree, and my intention was to become a licensed chemical dependency counselor for teenagers. I figured I went through this with my kid because I needed to do this for a living. And what I found during that period of my life was that teenagers who didn't think they had a problem didn't want help. And I was too much of a mother figure. And I had never
Mhm.
been addicted myself. So, bottom line, what I loved about the internship work that I was doing was working with the parents. So, as a result of the magic of Facebook, I came to know parent coaching was a thing,
Mhm.
and that the Jai Institute for Parenting was one of a few places I checked out to get certified. So in 2016, I got certified in that, and I have always worked with parents of middle school, high school, and only more recently, exclusively with parents of emerging adults. I chose to work with parents of adolescents initially and always because I don't think there's enough help for that age group. Everyone that I
Mhm.
went through the certification with wanted to work with parents of preschoolers or parents, and that makes sense to have that foundation and get that work done early. However, some parents didn't have that. And so that's where I've always focused. Now,
Mhm.
in 2021, I was not reaching the parents that I wanted to reach through speaking in our Flower Mound schools, through speaking in other local school districts, through being on Facebook. So someone said to me, Kim, you're so good on video. Why don't you try TikTok? And
Mhm.
I did not know anything about TikTok other than Other than, I thought that's a place where you went and danced, but
Yeah.
I decided, and she told me all the things. She told me you can't you can't sell people on things. You need to, it's very much an authentic website where platform where you have to share your story. And so as a result of being very transparent with this situation with my own son through social media video on both TikTok and Instagram, I have built a following, and I truly believe that what people see in my videos is someone who is willing to share her truth.
Mhm.
And the reason I do that is because I truly believe there isn't enough truth in the world, and that when people see the truth, that it inspires them to also live their truth. So bottom line, I had these parents keep coming at me with 18 to 25-year-olds, 18 to 30-year-olds, because of the story I was telling about my son being 20 and drinking and having mental health issues. So as a result of that, I shifted my focus and now exclusively work with parents of 18 and older, sometimes up to the age of, 40, whose sons and daughters have mental health and or substance use issues and or are failing to launch.
Thanks for sharing. And I wanted her to share a little bit about failure to launch and how she would define that.
Sure, sure. Okay, so in my mind, there's a book that I recommend often by a psychologist in Ohio whose name is Mark McConville, and the book is called Failure to Launch: Why Your 20 Something Isn't Moving Forward, or something like that, but it's called Failure to Launch. And I think and I'll go into a little bit more, but to me, failure to launch and what I have coming at me every single day are parents who are frustrated, stressed, angry, disappointed, overwhelmed, feeling like failures themselves because their son or daughter is not moving forward in their lives. And that can be for sure as a result of mental health and or substance use. But they don't have a direction. They're feeling, if I had to put it in one word, they're feeling hopeless. They don't trust the world. They will point to all sorts of reasons why they can't do something. And I do believe in part, and part of this book is about parenting and how I'm Generation X. And I think there's a reason that we did this, because we had a lack of emotional support or acknowledgement or feeling heard when we were kids. And I think this went on for many generations before. We then, when we had kids, kind of went to the other side too far, and we've done too much, and we've spent too much time focused on our kids' feelings and are not being comfortable with their big feelings. It makes parents very uncomfortable when their kids are struggling. And I tell parents on a regular basis, the reason it's so hard for you to watch your kids struggle is because you're growing too. This is an opportunity for you to grow too. So every time you fix, rescue, make it better, that kind of thing, you rob them of their purpose and you don't grow either.
Yeah, I think with that too, one of the things that it also tells the child when you do rescue them, and it's not at fault for parents. I think parents are just doing the best that they can. But I think one of the things is you're telling them that they're not capable of doing it. When
Yeah.
you fix it for them immediately, their internal dialogue, yes, maybe in the moment it has eased what's going on for them, but they've also got, okay, well, I wasn't able to handle that, so mom handled that. And then you keep doing that over and over and over again. So then there's a child that's trying to, get out into the real world and live independently on their own. And they have this internal dialogue that says, I'm anxious already. Things are harder for me. And I don't think that I'm going to be able to do that. And so then they just kind of shut down. Is that what you see a lot with these kids?
Yes. And there are two reasons I see this continuing to happen with parents. And I think this is an important thing to say. One, the parents' fear of self-harm and or maybe previous to suicide attempts or, suicidal ideation. Their fear of that, or that has actually happened, and that's a legitimate fear that I would never take lightly. That is one reason. The second reason this pattern of dysfunction that is unhealthy and continues the failure to launch is parents' emotions.
Yeah.
Guilt, fear, feeling like failures of themselves, getting stuck in that, like I said, with my son, I could acknowledge all of the ways that I contributed to his alcoholism. And I know I did, but I didn't get stuck there.
Yeah.
Because that wouldn't have helped him. And it certainly didn't help anybody else in my family. So I made a decision while I was being honest with myself about where I had misstepped or where I had been in denial, and decided I'm not going to stay there, but I've got to support and encourage my son where he's at without doing anything to enable this
Mm-hmm.
to continue. He may self-destruct. I have no control over that, but I will not give him the money so that he can go get the alcohol. If he
Yeah.
steals it and ends up in jail, I will not bail him out. And to this day, my son says that he ended up in jail twice. And to this day, he says part of the reason that I'm sober is that I do not ever want to be in jail again.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah.
Thanks again just for being so vulnerable. I think what you're describing sounds a lot like what we learn in Al-Anon and like CODA, like Codependent Anonymous. A lot of this like enabling behavior that, as you pointed out, comes from generations of maybe not feeling heard emotionally. So then we've maybe almost kind of overcorrected, if you will. And while it's important to validate and hold space for our kids' feelings, we have got to do more work as parents on our own emotional discomfort. And one of the other things that I was curious about, Kim, is, obviously we're living in a really different generation where there's Facebook, and I mean it's social media has just played such a huge role, I think, in the parenting production. I'm going to say some maybe controversial things here about that. Having just sent one off to college and seeing like the questions that parents are asking on a lot of these forums, and while some of it is helpful, some of it is just like, come on, like let these kids figure it out a little bit. And so can you share maybe some perhaps unpopular opinions on successfully parenting emerging adult children in these current times?
Yeah. I would say, and I just did a video on this that did really well on both TikTok and Instagram over the weekend. Your 20-year-old who is living at home, your post high school grad who is living at home,
Mm-hmm.
does not need a curfew. They
Mm.
do need to communicate and let you know out of courtesy where they are and when they will be back. And if they're
Mm-hmm.
going to be later, or, parents, you have to shift from needing to have this curfew, this time. And I understand. I have a daughter. My daughter is my youngest. And for a while I couldn't sleep there if she was not home. But I made a decision that my sleep was more important. Not that I don't love my daughter, but like,
Mm-hmm.
I expect her to communicate with me, and she does. And so parents shift to like, hey, if you're not going to be home tonight, can you please text me by 11 and just
Mm-hmm.
let me know so that I know so I can go to sleep. Now, this has everything to do too with a parent's emotional, I'm going to say controversially, emotional maturity.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
your ability to separate who you are from who they are is one of the key challenges here, and that's a lot of what I work on with parents. I don't and never have tracked my kids. If a family decides together that for whatever reason, whether it's safety or whatever, that they as a family are going to do that, I think that is fine. I think it is never fine to track your kid without their knowledge. And B, I've seen no good come from parents who are tracking their kids at college and know when the kid doesn't go to class or where
Mm-hmm.
they are at 5 a.m. or, all of the things. I've never seen it do anything but make a parent angry, anxious, and just cause a lot of problems in the relationship.
Yeah.
So I don't know how controversial that is, but I would not, I just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think too, if you wouldn't, I remember I talked with a therapist once, and she is a family therapist, and she had mentioned, with couples to, if you wouldn't do it if your wife wasn't there, you wouldn't do it if your husband wasn't there, you shouldn't do it. Same thing with kids, right? So like if you wouldn't like track your husband where he is, if he's gone, you shouldn't do that to your kids. They're adults, they're out trying to do live their lives. I wanted to ask you, what does that look like, a child who is failing to launch? Like, what do you see with kids? Is that more, because I know that there are children who go to school, they do what they need to do, the parents have respect, but then, it's an expensive world, so they live at home. So, what does that look like when we're saying failure to launch?
Well, so I talk to parents daily, I would say almost, that have more often than not, it's sons.
Okay.
And I would say the demographic is in the neighborhood of 23 years old, tried and didn't, attempted college maybe once, twice, maybe it was far away at first and then at home, community college. And again, this could be, it just happens to be, for whatever reason, I see more young men than women struggling with this, but that's not to say that young women are not struggling. Generally, sleeping all day, gaming, or on a screen all night, not all, a lot of them are anxious and they smoke weed on top of it. So they're in a very unhealthy pattern, sleep wake pattern. They eat crappy, they drink a lot of Red Bull, they smoke weed a lot. And when I work with parents, we really I have to really, ask them and work at, like, let's look at the past in part, and what has your kid been capable of before we can, like, what have they been able to accomplish before hitting this period of failure to launch. And quite frankly, I just want to say failure to launch to me is such a it's so negative and sounds so final. And I'm proposing, and I'm writing a book at the moment called Lost in Place,
Oh, I
because
love
I
that.
truly believe, and many parents have affirmed with me, that lost in place is because when you're lost, you can be found. And that is the goal with when I'm working with parents. Sometimes I get to work with a young person, but my focus is working on parents. So, lost in place is a term I prefer to failure to launch, just because I just don't think it sounds
Mhm.
so, like, final and so
Yeah.
negative. Because I think they are lost. And I think once
Yeah.
they figure out whether it's mental health and or substance use, and they can find a direction in their life, I truly believe they can. So that's the term that I use more often than failure to launch.
And when you see these kids who are, I know you said they're mostly males, which at my own practice, I've had parents come to me. So I am definitely going to send them your way with older children. They're always boys, they're addicted to gaming. Do you see a lot of the addiction with the, I guess, like just gaming technology? Is that a huge one that plays into this, because they go into like this fantasy world and they're getting these dopamine hits to their brain? And then I know you mentioned that it's always more boys. And I wonder too if that's because in society, mothers tend to kind of do more. We're just raised that way, where, you kind of do more for your sons, and your daughters learn from a younger age more of the caretaking and those kinds of things. So I didn't know if you could go a little bit more into the technology abuse, or if you're seeing more where it is, there's always some kind of mental health behind it. Is that really where you see for these kids who are kind of lost?
Yeah, I would say they're typically, like, on a rare occasion, I get a call from a parent who their son or daughter has attempted college once or twice. There's no substance use. Doesn't seem to be really any mental health issue. Maybe they're a little situationally depressed because they just don't know where they're going, but they're not like, they don't have these habits of the nighttime, daytime mixed up,
Mhm.
and they're not complicating things with weed and all the things. And I have two very good career coaches that I send people to, because if a young person is just feeling lost and they just don't know what direction to go in. They don't know what their strengths are and how that could lend to some kind of career, whether that's go to college or trade school or nothing at all, just head into an apprenticeship,
Mhm.
whatever it is. If that's the case, I don't want to say farm them out, but put that's not necessarily right a parenting thing. That's just a kid who doesn't know at 18, 19, 22, 24 what they want. And I
Mhm.
think because sometimes college is so expensive and this pressure that we inadvertently and unconsciously put on young people as to what they should be doing with the rest of their lives. They need to know this by the time they're 19 years old or whatever. It's overwhelming, and they don't seem to get, because I've seen this in like parents saying, just get a degree. Like, I got a degree in marketing and now I, am a whatever, something totally different, right? They just finish the school. It's about finishing the
Mhm.
degree, not that you need to know the rest of your life ahead of you. And it doesn't seem to me that young people got they really do feel like they have to know the rest of their lives that young. I don't
Mhm.
know if I just took myself, Sarah. I'm so sorry. I might have just taken myself way off another loop there.
Oh, no, no,
Mm-mm.
that was wonderful. No, I'm so glad you shared that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really helpful because it kind of distinguishes between if there's underlying mental health
Mhm.
issues versus just maybe I'm just being bombarded with all of this outside pressure to have it figured out. But I think where it gets trickier, and Kim, maybe you can kind of help steer me here, when we're talking about some underlying mental health concerns, either with the child, the parent, or
Mhm.
both. And typically, there's both, right? When we see substance use, and that could be, again, codependent behavior. I think a lot of work that I wonder if you're doing with these parents are maybe more around the boundaries, right? Like
Mhm.
if we're
Mhm.
already struggling with mental health and addiction issues, we have got to have some clear boundaries and
Yeah.
get comfortable with that, practicing that.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said before, I will first delve with parents into what are these kids really capable of, and that just as also as a segue into trying to understand it's a mental health issue that needs to be addressed first and primary, and or
Mhm.
substance. If that has to be addressed, and that's the work that I need to do with parents to head them in that direction, so that treatment or that's the primary, that's the core issue.
Mhm.
Or is there really not much of a mental health, based on their day to day and things like that? And is it a confidence issue? Is it that they don't have a skill issue? Like if they're missing a skill and they don't want to ask for help? Is
Mhm.
it just that life is too comfy cozy at mom and dad's house and mom and dad need to put in some boundaries? Quite
Mhm.
frankly, it can be a combination of things, but one of the things that I think is the most important thing I do first is really understand from the parent and get a sense of, like, is this a kid who we need to work on? They need to get treatment. Like they need
Mhm.
to have some kind of treatment in order to get a job.
Mhm.
Like, are they even functioning at a level where,
Mhm.
what's the primary core issue, and then working on that end of it is kind of where I go with parents.
Yeah, I think what I'm also hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like when parents come to you and there's been some mental health or some substance use issues, or maybe both, they're just so underwater and overwhelmed and they don't maybe know where to start. So it sounds like you
Mhm.
help them kind of take this in bite-sized pieces, whether that's, hey, get your kid into treatment so that you can have some physical space and some emotional healing, and we'll take it kind of one step at a time. Is that kind of how you tend to look at these more complicated situations?
Yeah, and that that tends to be the thing that comes at me the most are complicated situations. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm the coach that I really needed in 2008. I mean, I really,
Mm,
and I didn't immediately get here. Like,
Mhm.
I coached parents in a bunch of stages before this has come about. And quite frankly, it's not light work. I
Mhm.
think what I bring to, and I'm sure you guys can attest to this, um, what I bring to the table, I think, is an ability to stay calm in all situations. Like I just have this innate,
Mm-hmm.
even when my kid was at his worst, I'm not saying I wasn't anxious, but I am good under pressure and I'm good in tough situations. A grounded ability to listen, to ask the right questions, to help them get to the core issues and to see what, and it's not that I'm telling them. My goal is to help them reconnect with their intuition. They're so overwhelmed, so stressed, and they've
Mm-hmm.
been in this, they're so emotionally close to the situation. It's to have somebody who is not emotionally attached, who's been through personally and professionally enough
Mm-hmm.
to be able to listen and to guide them so that they can find a place of confidence in whatever the plan is for their kid, because nobody knows their kid like they do. They've just become disconnected,
Mm-hmm.
and in part that's like listening to a million videos and people, and I put those videos out. So, like I'm part of that, and I want them to become reconnected and to be parenting from their gut and not the anxious chatter in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 And I think that's so powerful too, because probably you see parents that come and they both are not on the same page with how they want to handle things with their child too. So that's
Mhm.
probably a really big thing is you're, seeing a dad who really wants to maybe set firm boundaries, kick the child out of the home, a mom who really is maybe, more of wanting her child to feel safe and protected. And then on top of it, having to be okay with your child maybe liking you for a while. I mean, that's a
Mhm.
tough one too as a parent is like, you want your children to love and like you, but that's not always the case. And sometimes they have to not like you to grow. And
Yeah.
then you have that relationship later. So I wonder if you could
Yeah.
talk a little bit about working with both parents and how that kind of works.
Yeah, I do work. I do really enjoy working with both parents. And it's funny that you say, dad wanting to set hard boundaries, mom maybe being softer, more empathetic, and it goes both ways. Like I've
Hmm.
worked with couples that, one's the other. And it's funny because I also work with couples who think they're on the same page, but then when you start talking to them, they're
Right.
really not, and they're giving mixed signals and mixed messages.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, again, the dysfunctional pattern of enabling continues. And I'd love to just share my version of helping versus enabling, just so that parents that are listening can
Hmm.
be clear with that. So helping is something that we do for someone that is reciprocal and it's occasional, right? I might go pick up my daughter's dry cleaning because she's got to go to work and she puts gas in my car because she used it last week or whatever. Like we do these things for each other, especially within the context of a family relationship. Enabling is when we do something for someone that they can and should be doing for themselves, and we do it over and over and over again. It's one way, it is not reciprocated. And at some point, a parent begins to feel,
Oh, I like that. That's going to have to be, I
Yeah.
think, a big one that I'm going to have to come back to and think about doing something for someone that they can do for themselves
Hmm.
versus like trading favors almost.
right, can
Oof.
and should be doing for themselves. I
Can
think this
and
is
should be doing for
important, like,
themselves.
right, can
Yeah.
and should be doing for themselves. When you
Mm.
are waking your son up
Hmm.
every day to go to work and he's 24 years old and he's living in your house
Hmm.
because he won't
Yeah.
get up on his own, you are enabling the situation.
Yes.
That's a great example. Yeah.
Ooh,
And then I
that's
got
big.
parents that go, "But what if they won't get up? But what if they won't?" And I get that, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
again, by you rushing in or not even rushing, but you going in and doing these things for them, it takes away their purpose. It takes away their ability to know that they are capable of it. Your
Hmm.
job as a parent is to say, "I believe in you. I believe in your
Hmm.
ability to get to your job on time."
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Ooh, that's big. That's really big. And we don't love to hear that sometimes, right? But we need
No.
to hear it. We need to
Hmm.
hear it. So, Kim, I wanted to ask you from your experience, either personally or professionally, what has been kind of the hardest lesson that you've had to to learn that you've had to watch or support or live just in this new work?
I'll speak personally. I think it could be applied to professional work as well. But if I had to bring one word to raising 5 very unique and different personalities in the world, I would say the word is tolerance.
Mm.
And I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean that in a teeth gritting way. I mean that I have learned that the outside, what you see on the outside, is not as important as what's on the inside.
Mhm.
I'll give you my oldest son is very pierced, tattooed. You would probably not want to meet him in an alley, but he is a wonderful human being. So I think that's part of it. My second son is just months away from becoming a Catholic priest, and
Oh, wow.
the interesting thing about that is, while we raised him inconsistently Catholic, this is for sure his calling, but none of the rest of us in the family practice at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so learning, this is definitely his calling, and I love him for the courage it takes to take on that vocation.
Mhm.
On the other hand, it hasn't really changed. I have a very different feeling about, so career wise, lifestyle wise, being able to objectively look at these kids who've come in through me. And that's going to lead me to, I'm just going to say this right now because I think it leads me right to it. The quote that's at the last page of my book is, "Our children come through us or to us, not for us, except for the lessons they reflect to us during their journey in an effort to grow us up along the way."
I love that.
Mm.
That is Cindy and I have this conversation all the time about
Yeah.
our children being sent to us for lessons, like they're a gift to us to teach us
Mhm.
something. That is 1000% amazing quote. Love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I will ask
Beautiful.
parents, what is this situation that you're in with your son or daughter trying to teach you about
Mhm.
life,
Mm.
about you? Because this is what it's about. And a lot of times the first lesson is we don't have control over
Mhm.
anyone else aside of ourselves and how we respond to any given situation. Who is the mother or father that I want to be when my 25-year-old daughter is is doing risky behavior,
Mhm.
is landing in jail because she's been drinking and got a DUI? Who is the parent that I want to be in that moment? And this is not about you, your ego, and whether or not
Mhm.
you are a good parent. This is
Mhm.
who do I want to, how do I want to lead this young person right now in this moment who's in this situation?
Yes. Yes. I
Yeah,
mean,
and I
just
think
yes to
yeah.
all of it.
And I think that that also teaches that resilience, which you have had your Kim, I think you're amazing. You've had so much resilience in your life. I always think it's amazing when mothers, because I had a mother who went back to school when I was little. She got her master's. I always find it amazing when people are like, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm like,
Mm.
my mom did. She had a child with special needs. She had another one. She was single. You can do what you want to do. It's just pushing through and doing it. And we can all be as resilient as we can push ourselves to be. But I love that you said that, because I think in this world, it's really hard for young adults nowadays with social media and everything else that they're seeing to create these lives that are just not realistic. And it's teaching them that even though maybe they have had a hard journey doing something, they can come through it. And that's not the end of their story. That's
Yeah.
not
Mhm.
the end of it. They can do hard things, and so can the parents.
Yes.
So
And
can
this
the
is what I
parents.
say to parents all the time. I'm like, look back at your own growing up or at your own emergent years. The things that I walked through, being pregnant at 18, having to leave my family home, being in an abusive relationship, getting out of that, having 4 more kids, like those are the things that build your character, that help you grow up. And so when you make it easier or take those things away, you take away that opportunity for them. And then you wonder why they don't have the resilience or the grit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ooh.
Very true.
So good. So many good points,
I
Kim.
know.
I have really just I've enjoyed this conversation so much. I'm curious if you can share a couple of things before we wrap. And one is, what are some, just besides yourself, of course, resources that you would advise parents to seek? Like, what immediate supports, what was maybe helpful to you, or what have you seen out there recently? And then also, do you have any programs coming up? Where can people find you?
Yeah. So, in terms of resources, at the time when my son was walking through his addiction, I want to tell you that I had a therapist and whatnot that probably would have been very helpful. I
Hmm.
think parents getting support for themselves when their kid is going through something difficult is extremely important. I have done that over the years at times when my kid, either one of them, were going through something difficult. So parents getting support, whether that's a therapist or a support group for parents of some sort. You mentioned Al-Anon before,
Hmm.
Hoda. I actually have a support group called Empowered Parents of Emerging Adults, and there's a whole bunch of different issues and challenges in there. It's really about parenting someone 18 and older. So get yourself some support. There are a million wonderful books out there. I have about 15 of them listed on my website, which is reallifeparentguide.com. My favorite books that I've read that have become like Bibles to me in the work that I do. In terms of myself, I do a monthly class called How to Parent an Emerging Adult, which
Okay.
is a very high level look, kind of the 101 on setting boundaries and healthy
Hmm.
communication with an emerging adult. And I run that once a month. And then, as you know, I'm on TikTok and Instagram at Kim Minch Parent Coach. So they can find me there too.
Awesome.
I love that. Also, real quick, too, Kim, before you leave, can you just also share some ways that parents can be a little proactive right now to help to help their children be successful going forward, to set them up for that, like what they can do, or just a little few tidbits, especially when they're little, so that
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
don't have these same
absolutely.
struggles.
So I think family is our very first foundation and community. And part of being in a family to me is pitching in. And this can
Mhm.
be when they're 3 years old, they can, put forks or spoons on the table, just the little things. And it's so, I mean, it's so important as they progress for them to be responsible. First and foremost, I would say for their school stuff. That doesn't mean that mom and dad can't help sometimes and that they aren't going to have a moment where they forget their book. Like
Mhm.
life
Hmm.
does happen in these things. I would say by middle school, certainly by high school, doing their own laundry. Like we have to create individuals that we are preparing them for independent adult life. And I certainly have talked to many moms who are like, but I love doing this for my kids, blah, blah, like even though they might be 25 years old and they're doing the laundry. And I'm like, but it's not about you,
Hmm.
it's about them.
Mhm.
And it's about you are the guide, right? Yes, when they're younger, they're fully dependent on you, but your goal is little by little to progressively be giving them areas where they can make choices in their lives
Yeah.
and where they can take on responsibilities.
Hmm.
And they are desperately needing to connect. Just one thing, just one short thing about screens. We are in a world where screen use is prevalent, right? And it
Mhm.
distracts parents and it distracts young people. So making sure that you have screen-free zones and screen-free time on a regular basis, dinner hour, dinner time, as much as you can do that together, may not be every night. But these are the things that foster a sense of community at home and in the family that then gets brought into the schools and into the world at large.
Hmm.
Mhm. I love that. So really just look at where they are developmentally. Say you have a 3-year-old, they can pick things up and put them back. you have a 14-year-old, start doing laundry. I know I want to just give a shout out to Cindy because she has always had her boys doing little things. I always tell her how great her boys are, always quick to engage and talk. And she's always had those boys doing stuff. So I just want to say
There's too
go
many of
Cindy
them.
with that. But yes. Yes, but no, I think that's great because I think when you start the foundation, it's easier than to lay the groundwork for it. So then you're not having to be so reactive with it later on. So I appreciate you sharing those tips for
And
our listeners.
you've got to find a way to make it fun.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
All the
true.
time, you have to make a game out of it, put on their favorite music in the kitchen, use
Mhm.
Alexa to, whatever it is that makes it a little more lighthearted and not so I hate cooking, but if I have the right music on, I am wonderful. And so
I love that.
how can you make it more palatable? It's not a negotiation, like these things have to be done, but how can we make it as fun as possible?
Yeah.
That's true. And I think of that as an example. We have started playing like Old Maid and Go Fish at dinner time. Even when we go out to eat, I'm sure people look at our table with my 5-year-old, but she struggles to sit still.
Yeah.
But she loves to play those games. And, we don't want her on a screen while we're eating. We want to talk. So it's just doing, I think, those little things as they get older to stay connected. So I love that because I think a lot of parents were just trying to do the best that we can. And it's always good to have, someone on who has been there, you have, sounds like 5 really great kids, all very different, that you have had to parent very different. So thank you for sharing all of this with us today.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
We really appreciate your wisdom. And I'm still thinking about the enabling versus the doing things that they can.
I love that. I'm using that now for that is the best. I love that.
Good. It's so good. And so just to recap, we're going to post everything in our link and on the show notes. And you can find Kim again at Real Life Parent Guide.
Yes.
Check her out. She's got so many wonderful things going on. And
when is your book going to be coming out? We would love.
Oh my goodness. Well, I hope by the end of the year. I think that's an aggressive thing.
Okay.
But I think the book, so it's called Lost in Place, A Guide Forward for Parents and Emerging Adults. I'm co-writing it with a wonderful life coach for emerging adults. I've never co-written a book before. I did publish a book a couple of years ago, but this will be a different thing. But I think this book is so timely, and that is what is causing me to really want to get it out. So it'll be called Lost in Place for sure. And I hope by end of this year, beginning of next year, and I'll keep everyone posted.
Oh yeah, we'll bring you back on. We'll bring you in your
that'd be great. We'd love to have you back, Kim. Thank you so much again just for the opportunity to speak with you and share your wisdom with us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yes,
it was a joy to share with you guys.
Thanks,
All right.
Kim.
Thanks again. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you, Kim.